So I think what we'd like to do is, we've got the right board here for a specific reason to help illustrate and show people very concretely. We can help remove a lot of the confusion. Understandably, there is a lot of fear and apprehension as you see the daily headlines and printing of money, quantitative easing, and what all is happening. So to go into the history, and I think we have to go back kind of about 2,500 years or so.
We could even go as far as 6,000, back to the days of Rome, which is where we really start. And let's dive in. And this is it's a fascinating story that is affecting everybody watching this right now, you included. And if you don't realize it yet, you've already lost over the last year not only 30 to 40% in your stock portfolio, and I know the market has come back to 10 to 11,000 over the last year or two. And I know you might think you may have made some of the money back, but in fact you haven't. And when it comes to real purchasing power, you've actually still lost 30 to 40% due to inflation. We'll go back 6,000 years and back to Roman times, which is really when this story began. But I think the important part for people to know is the urgency is that we're living through a very important series of events, really the most important of our lifetime, and it's a much bigger process than what people really understand or than the government is talking about, and we're going to go into that here in a little bit. And I want to give credit absolutely where credit is due. The two people that I've learned more about this stuff from than anybody else is Robert Kiyosaki and Michael Maloney, who's a Rich Dad advisor, and from goldsilver.com, and those two guys, the education they've provided, and they've been talking about this stuff for years. Kiyosaki came out with Rich Dad's Prophecy. I think it was back in 2002 or 2004.
I think it was 2002.
Yeah, and all of the stuff that's in that book is happening today. So I want to give them credit where credit's due, because it's been hugely meaningful.
I just want to mention as well, Michael Maloney is working with you within Elevation Group, which is huge, one of the authors of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll get into that here in a little bit as well. And, so really what is going on today is it's not a recession in the standard model that we think of a recession in, or the liquidity events and quantitative easing and the injections of capital that, the Fed has done would have already fixed it. And we're going on 3 years now, and most of the severe recessions we've had have only lasted a year, a year and a half at most. And this is only continuing to get worse. So something's different here, and why, and what is that and why? And we all remember the movie probably, Perfect Storm, where these three big hurricanes all converged on this one area, and it was, the storm of the century. Well, that's really what we're dealing with here today, is 5 factors that are all converging at one time in one place, and that have really been triggered by an event that I'll just call peak debt, which was really the busting of the housing bubble back in 2007, 2008, and in a way that can be considered peak debt. And, we're going to talk a little bit about peak oil, but peak debt is really what took place in the world. Was everybody who could get a loan was given a loan. Everybody who was extended credit was extended credit, to the point where all of the rules that keep the credit system safe and viable were totally thrown out the window, and people who were not supposed to be given loans were given loans. And the worst part, though, was when the banks started to resell this debt in the form of derivatives on subprime mortgages that had amplified the amount of bad debt by a factor of 50. And so you have this huge black hole of debt that's... I don't really remember the magnitude. I think the magnitude of the total derivative debt obligations is around $70 trillion, or even much more than that, 700 or 70. I don't really remember off the top of my head right now. Impossible to pay back. And so this happens over and over and over again. And the first time it happened in Rome in 6000 is you essentially have every country goes through 7 stages. And I made notes for myself to go through these here, and this will kind of give everyone a historic picture of what's happening now, and you're going to kind of get it. And you're going to go, oh, I see where this is really headed. And in stage 1, a country starts out with really good money, which is either gold or backed by gold. When Rome first came out with their first currency, it was gold and silver coins. In stage 2, as it develops economically and socially, it begins to take on more and more economic burdens, adding layer upon layer of public works and social programs, pension plans, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the stuff we see happening today, right? As its economic affluence, this is stage 3, grows, so as its economic affluence grows, so does its political influence, and it increases expenditures to fund a massive military, just as Rome did, and took over the world, and just as the United States has done over the last 60, 70 years, essentially since World War II. Stage number 4, eventually it puts that military to use and expenditures explode. We see examples of this again in the Vietnam War, the deficit that was created there, the Iraq War, the deficit that was created there, Iraq War II, and very just obvious stuff. And then stage number 6 is finally the wealth transfer caused by expansion of the currency supply is felt by the population as severe consumer price inflation, triggering a loss of the faith in the currency. And the final stage is an en masse movement out of the currency into precious metals and other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapses and massive wealth is transferred to them from those who had enough foresight to accumulate things like gold and silver and other commodities ahead of time from those who didn't. And if you go through the 7-stage cycle, and again, this is something Michael has spent years studying, hundreds of countries have gone through this progression. Mm-hmm. And obviously we are in between stage 6 and stage 7. So it's kind of the final chapter for the U.S. empire. And essentially what we're talking about is, when back before 1971, the U.S. was on a gold standard through the Bretton Woods Agreement. In 1971, Nixon had to take us off of that. And so ever since that point, we've been dealing with a purely fiat currency, which means that it is really backed by nothing, and it's just paper that has no real value to it. And that's what happened back in Rome. They ran into the same issues. They had to fund this massive growing empire. They had to fund food programs and wheat programs to feed their hungry portions of the population. And in order to do that, they started diluting the gold and silver coins they had, first by clipping little chunks out of it, clipping coins. That's where that saying came from. Then they started mixing in less valuable metals like copper and lead and tin and things like that. And that's our version of today of just printing more. Makes it worth less and less, and things cost more and more. So over the last 100 years, over 30 countries have gone through hyperinflation, and their fiat currency has been destroyed. And in fact, over the last 6,000 years, not a single fiat currency has ever survived more than 30 to 40 years. That's the average lifespan for a fiat currency. And so it's a 100% track record. Every single one of them has ended.